And let's target the root cause of terrorism. They're called terrorists.
Legal experts say that the lack of an actual terrorist threat in Canada explains why Canada's government is quick to pass legislation which allows terror suspects to be detained without evidence or charges.
So what changed today to have the decision to go ahead and move?
Well, in a word, Boston.
Iran has rejected any cooperation with al-Qaeda.
Yes, we've reached the portion of the program where we jump right in on Stephen Harper's nightmare. Oh, yes.
You mean his adoption of the security state?
I'm Darren Howard.
I'm Robert Nisbet.
I'm Kendra Cooper.
It's so good to be here with you today. Well, we start talking about some of the memes that those guys are shelling out. And it's the terrorism thing. Terror.
Oh, they need you to be afraid. Be afraid.
Be afraid. Oh, while we hide, cowering in the closet, let's run this.
Yesterday, a small army of liberal pseudo-intellectuals had a collective spasm after I said that terrorists are the cause of terrorism. The liberal leader had touched off the debate when he said the Boston bombings happened because someone, quote, feels completely excluded. But were the Tsarnaev brothers excluded? The United States included them by sheltering their family with formal asylum from the war-torn Dagestan. The younger terrorist was included in a quality education at a state-of-the-art school, which boasts an amazing 11-to-1 student-teacher ratio, after which the city gave him a $2,500 scholarship. America also included the older terrorist Tamerlan with a taxpayer-funded welfare benefit that continued even after the main U.S. counterterrorism agency had added him to its watch list. Excluding these facts is not the mark of a nuanced intellectual, but of an ideologue who is in over his head. Let us follow the facts, not liberal ideology, and let's target the root cause of terrorism. They're called terrorists.
Okay, I just do not know what to say.
I'm more afraid of our politicians than of terrorists.
Yeah. I mean, he's keeping it vague, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
he's leaving it wide open so that the definition of terrorism can be whatever the government tells us it is.
That's right. So
It's a tactic used to scare people.
Yeah.
And he's trying to say that the liberals are operating under an ideology and ignoring facts when this is the government that muzzled every scientist and everybody who disagrees with them.
Well, we can't have facts messing with our ideologies.
No, of course. And then, of course, let's talk about the science minister that he appointed. But that's coming up. You're listening to Radio Free Canada, truth, justice, and the Canadian way. Yeah, I know. What do you got for me, brother?
Well, you know, the Harper government has been exploiting the recent terrorist plot they busted in the States to push through anti-terrorism legislation.
So remember, don't be afraid. Turn the TV off and stay with us. This is Radio Free Canada.
Concocting terrorism-related incidents to justify unpopular political policies is a well-known tactic of Western governments. And this week, Canadians appear to have fallen victim, yet again, to that tactic. Even opposition members of parliament have suggested that the recent explosions in Boston and the so-called foiled terror plot in Canada are being exploited by the Harper government to ram yet more unconstitutional anti-terrorism legislation through parliament. Analysts say that universally accepted standards of jurisprudence have to be done away with when it comes to those accused of being terrorists by the Canadian government, because many of those terror suspects are actually innocent. Legal experts say that the lack of an actual terrorist threat in Canada explains why Canada's government is quick to pass legislation which allows terror suspects to be detained without evidence or charges. In Canada, the state has often claimed to have foiled terror plots, as was claimed this week. However, time and time again, those accused of terrorism turn out to have been set up by intelligence agents and other beneficiaries of a fear-based society. The two men arrested this week in Canada's so-called foiled terrorism plot have professed their innocence. Yet, analysts fear that by the time a verdict is rendered on their cases, the Harper government will have capitalized on their arrests, and yet more hard-won rights of Canadians will have been suspended. Joshua Blakeney, PressTV, Calgary.
And that, to a T, is exactly how it works. They create terror right now, and then they capitalize on it before anybody can find out what's going on.
You mean Steve and his gang have an ulterior motive?
No. It's not like they have a hidden agenda. It's out in the open now.
Yeah.
Okay. Terror, that's one of those labels, though. One of those obscure labels that causes all the baby boomers to be afraid.
Yeah, I mean, it's been used to define almost everything.
Yes.
I mean, anything that goes against the state or that they can use to push fear, you can just label it as terrorism.
Yeah.
Right?
And then
without
get
question.
billions of dollars. Our own Homeland Security here lost $3.1 billion. And they're saying, oh, well, that's just so happens to be a little bit of an accounting error.
Yeah.
$3.1 billion missing in the Harper government, and they still think they have credibility.
Yeah.
Of course, point at the Indian band and say, well, those guys mismanaged funds.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Well, isn't that also a statement on our educational system?
What's that?
The fact that the parliamentarians can't do math.
Yeah.
Can't do math, can't count. Yeah, right. Can we say F-35? I mean, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars that people don't know about on this F-35 development right now. $500 million has been spent. Wow. Where's the major news on that?
Well, they do make a little blip on the radar every now and then.
Justin Bieber. That's all I've got to say. Well, they're hyping out terror, and remember, you are 8 times more likely to be killed by an RCMP officer than be killed by a terrorist. You are 5 times more likely to be killed by a lightning strike, not hit by a lightning strike, killed by a lightning strike, than to be killed by a terrorist.
Yes, more people die slipping in their bathtub.
But we're not out
terrorists.
We just have a war on bathtubs.
Yeah.
Yes, and apparently on crock pots and pressure cookers.
Yes.
Okay, so did you want to run this?
You mean the fact that we held off busting our own terrorists?
Talking about stories being ignored.
Yeah.
Weston has been working this story for months, and he was the reporter who broke it today. Greg, what do you know that officials didn't tell us today?
Well, one thing they didn't mention, Peter, is that for months, law enforcement agencies in this country have been ready to shut down this alleged terror plot and arrest these individuals. They didn't, in part at the behest of American intelligence agencies who wanted to know more about who else might be involved in this alleged plot, and, of course, a very keen interest in those al-Qaeda operatives in Iran who were at the other end.
So what changed today to have the decision to go ahead and move?
Well, in a word, Boston. The horrific events there of the past week obviously set off alarm bells with law enforcement agencies everywhere, and they simply decided that either the Americans decided to ask Canada to shut down this alleged plot involving the attack on the trains, or Canada just said, we're going to do it ourselves.
Would that have been a decision made by the security services, or would it have been a political decision at that point?
Well, I think it's safe to say both. Again, as soon as Boston happened, there would have been high-level meetings between law enforcement agencies, intelligence agencies, and their political masters, and the orders would have been, if there are any loose ends, tie them up, and in this case, shut this case down.
All right, we'll leave it at that for now. Thank you, Greg. Greg Weston, reporting for...
So the real question here is, was this just a domestic dispute between a father and his son? That's who turned in these terrorists in Canada.
Yeah.
The dad.
It wasn't that, stellar police work?
Yeah. I mean, the dad turns in the son saying, this guy's getting radicalized. Okay. And, joining political groups. He's got a whole bunch of attitude. Nobody's saying, hey, looks just like a dad throwing his son under the bus.
Yeah.
And no terrorism involved, because they weren't qualified and capable of doing anything unless the FBI supplied it with them.
Boston did provide a nice opportunity to pass through that anti-terrorism legislation, though, and coupled on top of this.
Just so happens. And then the RCMP says, well, it had nothing to do with us.
Yes, we were holding off at the FBI's request. False flag, stings.
Yeah. And then, rolling out the police state and making sure you've got terrorism where you can throw people in jail without a lawyer.
And you got to love the spin. They talk about this horrific event that happened in Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
3 people died, 118 were wounded. Okay, that's bad.
Right.
Yeah.
But on the same day, 54 attacks occurred in Iraq.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And in fact, we've got 129 children killed by drone strikes
Yeah.
in Pakistan right now. Where's the news on that?
Well, they're brown people. They don't matter.
They just keep playing the Boston bombings like they played the trade towers going down over and over and over again.
And, of course, the U.S. News is still trying to keep it all Boston all the time.
Yeah, I know. But
every
people
time there's
are
a
bored.
new story, it's breaking news.
Yeah. But people are getting bored, and they're also waking up to it. We're watching all the memes on major boards right across the board. Occupy Wall Street is calling it for what it is, just another false flag attack.
Yeah.
They allowed it to occur to ensure that people stay afraid.
Creating opportunities.
Yes. I mean, Yeah.
Yeah.
And then talking about a weak group of individuals, we're writing the history books right now. They aren't.
Yeah.
And they cannot handle that part.
Sure sells a lot of guns, though.
One last thing, talking about the international and the warmongering that goes on. Because remember, people who support terrorism, they support homeland security, are not civilized individuals. They're just warmongers. And my opinion, check this out.
Canada's border agency, which is run by the government, is warning that there is a possibility of Iranians with what it's calling sinister motives slipping into Canada. An intelligence report by the Canada Border Services Agency says since 2008, 19 Iranians have been found inadmissible to Canada on security grounds. This comes after the RCMP claims it foiled an al-Qaeda-linked attack on Canadian railways, where they say 2 men were receiving support from al-Qaeda representatives in Iran. Iran has rejected any cooperation with al-Qaeda. Critics say Canada is trying to create a so-called Iranophobia. There are many Iranians living in Canada as successful immigrants or citizens who never create any problems and are law-abiding people. While Western countries have in recent years turned their focus on militant extremism, it was Iran who, before the September the 11th attacks, was even more outspoken than the West against the Taliban. Meanwhile, the U.S., neighbors and allies with Canada, is itself currently cooperating with al-Qaeda-affiliated groups in Syria. Ashante Hathaway, Press TV, Montreal.
So I have to wonder, yes, what?
What, do you mean that Canada might actually be cooperating with al-Qaeda-affiliated groups in Syria? That's not beyond the realm of possibility.
I mean, Osama bin Laden was a CIA employee for years. Okay? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I mean, it just goes back to what Fist said, right? Okay. Just like looking at authority, not asking the hard questions, following their lead. I mean, and never questioning their lead.
Yeah.
You know?
And I would look at them and say, well, could we get someone more credible than the RCMP to report this?
Yeah,
or the CIA spokesperson?
Or the FBI spokesperson. As soon as the Boston bombing occurred, everybody was asking, well, was it FBI or CIA?
Well, just remember when you hear the phrase, according to official sources, get ready for the BS.
Get that pitchfork out, kids, and get it off and get it going. But use your own intellect, because remember, if it bleeds, it leads is not an intellect, and it's not journalism. And that's what we get locally, and that's what we get nationally. We don't have journalism anymore. Chris Hedges said it the best. Left-wing investigative journalism is done.
It's all up to the independent media now.
Yeah.
And who is that?
Us.
Arg, matey. That would be us. Well, we're making it look good, and I really enjoy that part. I'm Darren Howard.
I'm Robert Nisbet.
I'm Kendra Cooper.
We're going to run through a whole bunch of stuff right here, but remember to join us May the 18th right down at City Hall as we protest police brutality. We want you to get informed and take a look at the news and the way they didn't tell you the story about Buddy Tavares at all. That's all coming up. May 18th, Kelowna, British Columbia, 2 p.m. at Kelowna City Hall. Make sure you're there. We're going to be right back with
Innovation Update.
Yes, that's on the decks right here. So stay tuned. Everybody's sitting there looking at me.
Radio Free Canada.
Hang on, I got a fire to put out in the other room. I'll be right back.